And on to the other big news of the day. Amidst their deepest differences so far, America and Europe are now seeking to agree on a united front financially and militarily against Russia at the NATO summit in Ankara that is underway. Many believe that NATO is at the risk of being decoupled, with President Trump not just pressuring European nations to pay up more, but also making personal jabs against leaders of partner nations like the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. But while the future of the alliance is at stake, the other significant issue at this year's summit would be whether US President Donald Trump gives Turkey what it wants. The world is closely watching the possibility that Turkey could once again receive America's most advanced stealth fighter, the F-35. The issue has returned to the center of international diplomacy as Trump and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan are expected to meet on the sidelines of the summit. According to multiple media reports, President Trump is expected to support efforts toward a potential sale of the F-35 fighter jets to Turkey. Now, if this is approved, it would mark a dramatic shift in US-Turkey defense relations after years of tensions. The proposed move has also generated concern in Israel, which closely monitors the military balance in West Asia. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu urged the United States not to sell its F-35 fighter jets or components to Turkey. He said, and I quote him here, "I don't think they should be given F-35s or the engines for their fighter jets because that'll upset the power balance in the Middle East, which is ultimately guaranteed by the Israeli air superiority and also by America's posture in the Middle East." Now, to understand why the US-Turkey deal matters, we need to go back to 2019. Turkey was originally one of the founding partners in the multinational F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. Turkish companies manufactured hundreds of components for the aircraft starting 2002, and Ankara had planned to purchase more than 100 F-35 jets. However, relations deteriorated after Erdogan purchased the Russian-made S-400 air defense missile system. Washington argued that operating the S-400 alongside the F-35 posed an unacceptable intelligence risk. American officials feared that Russian radar technology could potentially collect sensitive data on the stealth capabilities of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. So as a result, the United States removed Turkey from the F-35 program, cancelled aircraft deliveries, and imposed sanctions under the CAATSA legislation. And since then, Turkey has repeatedly sought a path back into the program. Now, at this year's NATO summit, the possibility of Erdogan's desire coming true appears to be back on the table. Sources familiar with the discussions say that President Trump is prepared to explore restoring Turkey's access to the F-35, but there remains one major obstacle: the S-400 missile system. US law and congressional restrictions currently prevent Turkey's return to the program, while the Russian air defense system remains in Turkish possession. Reports indicate that American officials are reviewing possible legal and diplomatic options, including discussions over whether the S-400 system could eventually be removed or transferred to another country. No final agreement has been announced yet, and even if the White House does support this move, congressional approval remains uncertain. For Turkey, however, regaining access to the F-35 would represent a major strategic victory. Because remember, the F-35 Lightning II is widely regarded as the world's premier fifth-generation multi-role stealth fighter. Designed by Lockheed Martin, the aircraft combines stealth technology, advanced sensors, electronic warfare capabilities, and network-centric combat systems. It is currently operated by numerous NATO allies, including the US, UK, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Poland, and others. The aircraft has, in fact, become the backbone of NATO's future air power strategy. Now, Turkey argues that as NATO's second largest military after the United States, it should not remain excluded from one of the alliance's most important defense programs. For President Erdogan, hosting the NATO summit provides an opportunity to strengthen Turkey's role as a key regional power. Ankara has positioned itself as an important diplomatic player, maintaining dialogue with both NATO allies and countries such as Russia. while also seeking a larger role in regional security issues. President Erdogan has repeatedly stated that Turkey never gave up on the F-35 program and continues to pursue discussions with Washington. Now, the NATO summit could determine whether years of strained US-Turkey defense relations are entering a new chapter. And because, remember, the F-35 is not simply another fighter aircraft, but it is a symbol of strategic trust within the NATO. Any decision on Turkey's future participation will carry consequences far beyond the alliance itself. Meanwhile, remember, the NATO summit itself comes at a critical time for global security. Alliance leaders are discussing increased collective defense spending, military modernization, continued support for Ukraine, and preparations for future threats from Russia. In fact, NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte has called on all member nations to present clear and credible plans to meet ambitious new defense spending targets. All eyes are on now what happens next at the NATO summit, drama, deals, and whether Erdogan wins his reward from Trump for not getting involved in the Iran war. At a time when Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir is struggling to deal with internal violence and raging protests in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the country is desperately trying to emerge as a mediator in yet another conflict. As per reports, Pakistan has begun mediating between Libya's two main rival power centers. On the one side is the internationally recognized Government of National Unity, led by Prime Minister Abu Hamid al-Dabaiba, which controls the capital Tripoli and the northwestern region. On the other hand, the Libyan National Army, led by its commander-in-chief, Khalifa Haftar, controls major parts of the country, including most of its oil fields and key infrastructure. Reports suggest that a proposal titled Libya Reunification Plan is being discussed at present. This would essentially entail a 36-month transitional power-sharing arrangement under a body called the Government of National Consensus and Presidential Council. As per reports, Abdul Hamid al-Dabaiba shall be the Prime Minister, whereas the Libyan National Army's Deputy Commander, Saddam Haftar, will serve as the chairman of this council. And this is not all. Khalifa Haftar will exercise control over the budget. Pakistan's role as a mediator is also reportedly being supported by Saudi Arabia, Turkey, as well as Qatar. Remember, in December last year, Islamabad's ambitions came to the fore when it reached a deal worth $4 billion to sell military equipment such as JF-17 fighter jets to the Libyan National Army. Hectic parley started last month when Saddam Haftar first met Asim Munir in Rawalpindi. This was followed by his visit to Washington, D.C., where he met the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. As per the U.S. State Department, both sides discussed the ongoing efforts to unify Libya's military, economic, and political institutions. In fact, Rubio stressed that America will remain at the forefront of diplomatic efforts to create conditions for a democratically elected government to lead Libya forward. Another country has come under the lens for its overt efforts towards Pakistan. While Armenia, remember, is a key buyer of India's indigenous weapon systems like the Akash and Pinaka, it has now appointed Karen Grigoryan as its first ever envoy to Pakistan. Until last year, Pakistan was the only UN member state not to recognize Armenia's independence since 1991 due to its long-standing support for Azerbaijan in its conflict with Armenia. However, they established diplomatic relations in August last year, days after US brokered a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But Pakistan's diplomatic maneuvers are being seen as a diversionary tactic to maintain global relevance, at a time when its own internal situation has been deteriorating. Imagine claiming to be a CIA insider, gaining access to the president's defense ministries and billion-dollar military negotiations, only for the entire story to allegedly end in fraud allegations, lawsuits, and an international investigation. That is the extraordinary controversy surrounding Indian-born American businessman Gaurav Srivastav. Investigations by a US-based NGO, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or the OCCRP, and Indonesia's Tempo magazine alleged that Gaurav Srivastav built close ties with Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto and his inner circle by projecting himself as someone with deep connections inside the US intelligence and the defense establishment. The reports claim that Gaurav became a familiar face around Indonesia's defense leadership between 2020 and 22. He allegedly attended meetings where American defense companies discussed the possible sale of F-15 fighter jets and other military equipment to Indonesia. His companies allegedly also secured 5 preliminary agreements linked to major defense projects. Now, these reportedly included proposals involving 36 F-15 fighter jets, 30 Black Hawk helicopters, C-130 Hercules aircraft maintenance, and a joint military command and control center. But none of those proposals ultimately turned into actual contracts. A spokesperson for Indonesia's Ministry of Defense to OCCRP confirmed the existence of the preliminary agreements, but stressed that they did not constitute a binding contract. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto allegedly did not respond to the outlets for comments. Reports claim that several of Gaurav Srivastav's companies had little or no defense experience at all. Some were reportedly incorporated only around the time Indonesia issued the preliminary letters, while others later allegedly failed due diligence checks or they were deregistered. Now, this controversy has intensified after civil lawsuits filed in the United States by Gaurav's former business partner. The lawsuits accuse Gaurav Srivastav of fraud, extortion, and falsely presenting himself as a CIA operative. Former acting U.S. Defense Secretary Christopher Miller told Indonesian magazine Tempo that Gaurav never represented the American government and described him as someone who tried to exploit the appearance of influence. The investigation also traces millions of dollars in disputed business transactions. Indonesian financial authorities are reportedly examining those transactions alongside overseas agencies for possible money laundering.